So the NRG Insights is all about speaking to people of influence in the industry, anyone that's got anything interesting to say, basically, and anyone who can share and add any value to the industry. So on that note, I've got Michael Stratton here today from MS Lending. Thank you for joining me, Mike.
No problem. Thank you for having me.
I mean, we spoke about this before, but genuinely interesting story. So tell me about your kind of financial services journey that took you to CEO of MS Lending.
So my financial services journey started back when I was 18. It's probably all I've ever known. Straight out of school, went to Australia for a year, coaching football there, came back to the real world and realised that I needed to get a proper job. And I was fortunate enough to join one of the largest specialist lenders in the UK, what was then sort of Lancashire Mortgage and a few other subsidiaries. People now know it as Together. And spent 11 amazing years at Together, learning from some of the best industry leaders that are still around today, soaking up as much knowledge as possible, whole range of different roles, from starting from the bottom and working my way up. Had 11 amazing years there. And then COVID happened. Obviously, there was a lot of changes going on where I was, and I suppose in the industry as a whole. And I felt it was probably the right time for me to sort of make the move and make the change. And I deliberated different things, whether it was to start a brokerage because I had good contacts. And then I thought, why not? Let's go for it. Let's start a lender. Again, I have a good network of sort of high net worths and private investors. So I set up MS Lending Group sort of late in 2020, started trading in 21. And the rest is history. But I think for me, what may have seemed a difficult period for a lot of people or a lot of lenders, it was COVID, people having to manage their back books, manage working from home, payment holidays. To start during that period, and to caveat, I had a newborn maybe a month or two beforehand, but just to add to the fun. But there's never a right time. I think there'll always be a time that people make excuses in life for anything where, you kick the can down the road because something comes up. So having no back book, I think...
Funnily enough, Michael, I liken it to having a baby. There's never a right time to have a baby. Right? There's always something coming up. There's always something happening. And then you managed to do both at the same time.
Correct. And it wasn't easy. But I think for us, from a business perspective, having no back book in a time where a lot of lenders were having to manage their back book, some stopped lending altogether just to focus on the back book, allowed us to sort of get maybe a head start in the industry. And I think it shaped a lot of the products that we're known for today, because we were going into the market at a time where you couldn't do full valuations because you weren't allowed valuers to go into properties. So we created products where you didn't need valuations. And fortunately enough, we weren't bound by covenants with funding lines because we were privately funded, that allowed us to maybe get a bit of a head start, have a bit of a niche. And I always said when I set up that in a really diluted market with lots of lenders, brokers having spent so many years going in and out of brokers' offices, they want something different. They've got tons of lenders every day walking in, offering them cheap money or this or that. So we wanted to make sure, even though we weren't going to be the cheapest in the market, we were able to offer a point of difference. And I think that's what we did.
Amazing. And how did you do that? What is that point of difference? Because you're right, you're in a market with 240 lenders, and there's a lot of kind of people of similar size to as you were when you started. Like 2 or 3 man bands, family money or private investment money, that kind of thing. It's very difficult to put your head above the parapet, and you've clearly done that. If you look at your successes over, and this is blowing smoke out your ass, you've done extremely well over the last 3 years, haven't you? Like, the industry knows it. It's a tough gig to push yourself through that first stage. What do you think was kind of different about what you did?
Excuse me. I think relationships are massive. Relationships are massive for us. I think everyone will say relationships are massive for them as well, and I'm not saying they're not, but we spent a lot of time working on those relationships. We weren't in a rush. Excuse me as well. Sorry.
We're both in the same boat today. I must be contagious through the microphone.
The mine's not self-inflicted. We spent a lot of time sort of working on our relationships with people that they were long-standing in the industry. So I think I was able to fall back on that. I was mentioning we weren't in a rush. I set the business up and we didn't have crazy ambitions. Whilst I'm an ambitious person, I'm also I'm not reckless. So
Yeah.
I always knew I wanted to watch the money go out, watch it come back in again. And quite quickly through sort of year one, we realised that there was needs and wants for our products. I think products are important. I think they're just a small part of it. A lot of lenders use them as sort of marketing tools and as a bit of a gambit to get business in. But I always said, for me, it sounds very simple, but I'm always sort of impressed on the staff that we try and do the simple things well. We try and call people back if we say we're going to call them back. If we get an email from someone, we respond to them. If we say we'll send an offer this afternoon, we send an offer this afternoon. And I think so many people don't do it. And from our feedback from brokers is that, we have a mantra that we are what we do, not what we say we'll do. And if we say we're going to do something, we do it. And it's important to us. And I think, I speak a lot in the office about the fact that we don't really sell products or bridging. We actually sell certainty. And I think I've realised for a lot of our brokers and clients that we work with, in the bridging space, there's loads of factors that go into a bridge. That yes, cost is important and it's one small part of an overall proposition. But anyone that's coming to take a bridge, they need it for a specific purpose. They don't want that money sat in their bank account because it's costing them a lot of money. So they'll be using it for something. So to give them that certainty, and that comes over time as well. You've got to perform. If you say you're going to do something, you do it. Moving of goalposts. Spend the time to get the decision right day one, so that there isn't that moving of goalposts, or what it maybe sometimes perceived to be. So.
It's so true. I mean, we wrote an ebook. I wrote an ebook recently. I'm sure you've read it. It's a really good bedtime read. But genuinely, it's only about 20, 30 pages. It's actually about brokerages, about how to become the best brokerages, because obviously we're surrounded by them. And then page one is just do what you say you're going to do.
Yeah.
It's the simple thing. If you forget anything else about the book, do what you say you're going to do, because it makes such a massive difference, doesn't it? Because you'll be surprised how many, like you said, call someone back, never let them down. Especially in my industry in recruitment, the one thing we hear from people, the biggest concern is never calling back.
Yeah.
And you think, if all you've got to do to put your head above the parapet is call someone back, it shocks me.
It's massive. And I could sit here, we're only still, in my view, very, very early on our journey. I'm quite level-headed, and yes, we've had 3 amazing years and 3.5 amazing years, and we've hit higher heights than we expected to. But I couldn't sit here and say sort of the magic, that there is a secret recipe to it. There is, I think we've invested heavily in the people within the business, but not just the people. I think our process in regards to what good looks like in terms of people, for us, as we've spoken previously, Marcus, the way that we look at things like CVs is very different maybe to other people. The way that we judge what looks good for us maybe is very different to what other people do.
Well, that was our initial conversation, wasn't it? And it wasn't like sharky for business or anything. It was genuinely, I love the way you talk about your people. So I messaged you to say, I love the way you talk about your people, because it's the number one thing in your business. It's the most important thing. If you get that wrong and you get everything else right, you're still screwed.
Yeah.
And you have a certain way, like everything you talk about online is all about the way your people are. But you've obviously concentrated on that from the beginning, right? It's not just getting bums on seats. It's about making sure the right people are in the business, and obviously culture-wise, they fit.
Yeah, it's always been massive for us. I would say over the last 1.5 years or so, we've spent a lot of time sort of as to what looks good. We put a lot of emphasis on the behaviours. Everyone talks about culture, and every business talks about the culture and what they want the culture to look and feel like. And I think culture isn't necessarily something that you just decide, I want to have a good culture. I think it starts from the top, and it starts from the behaviours that people at the top sort of demonstrate.
100%.
And then
you can't build a culture without the management buying into it, can you? It's a trickle-down effect.
Correct.
Well, you see that in every business. If there's a knobhead at the top, it trickles down. You know what I mean? If they've got that, if they live but then breathe by their culture, it trickles down. I think it's so important.
Massively. And I think we've worked hard on what our behaviours are as a business, and then when it comes to our hiring process, competency and ability to do a role comes comfortably second, third, fourth. The behaviours that person sort of demonstrates, and the way that we sort of can try and get that out of them, and try and understand examples of situations they've been in, because we've had it, we know what it looks like. Or, you could have an amazing salesperson that's hitting targets beyond belief, but if they don't get on with the rest of the team, or they're very selfish in regards to what their figures are, or it can happen in various different roles of the business. It can really spoil what you've got. So I think, we've worked really hard on that. As the business has grown, I've always been very keen not to have different departments working in silos. So we spend a lot of time cross-departmental, discussing what's going on in different departments. People take time away from their desks to understand what finance are doing, what marketing are doing, what the underwriters are doing. And even if you're in finance, they might sit with the underwriters to understand certain things. And what we've realised,
I think it gets everyone buying as well, doesn't it? Like you're bought into the business opposed to your job. I think
it's bought into the business, and it creates an atmosphere where people, often sales get all the credit online. Sales people, they do the sales, they get the thank yous from the brokers, and I get it. But actually, what the finance team do, or our management accountants have got to do to sort of keep the wheel turning, is massive. So we do put a lot of emphasis on. It's a very much a flywheel that everyone's got to keep pushing hard in order for it to go faster and faster, and it's not just one department.
Amazing. And I'm right in saying you did a lot of it. You did everything yourself at the beginning, right? You just didn't go out hiring straight away.
No. So I was always conscious that I wanted to. I suppose some businesses will start up. They start up in debt because they take on big offices, they take on staff, and they want to come out with a bang. And everyone does things their own way. I thought to myself, no, it's just me, myself, and I to a degree, and we, I did have a bit of help, but I was the only sort of employee, as it were, and I was doing the admin, putting stuff on the system, doing the underwriting, going on the bank account, sending the money, and that's it. It was good. My career, I've done all of that beforehand anyway, and as the business grew and we saw more demand and want, I wasn't overly cautious, and I sort of backed myself and knew that we could do it. So that's when we started taking on more and more staff.
How did it, out of interest, how did you, when you were taking on more people, because obviously you'd already jumped up a bit of business, what was the first? Did you go for process or did you go for sales first?
So I actually brought in a gentleman called Michael Stratton, who you might have heard of in the industry. So Michael Stratton, I knew from my time at Together. I brought him in as a salesperson. So I realised that for me to continue to take all the inquiries, etc., there was a gap where we could reach out to more people and I suppose have a further reach if we had somebody else that was prospecting for business, or actually, without being sort of arrogant, maybe more reacting to the amount of business that we were getting in our early stages. So having someone that could look at those transactions, then quickly followed sort of business processes to sort of manage the cases through. And then as it does, it spirals with people in finance, people in marketing, and other parts of the business. So, I mean, the first year. Go on, Mike.
Sorry, carry on.
No, I was just going to say the first year for us, there was we lent 25 million, and there was 3 members of staff by the end of year 1. But then year 2, we started to. I realised that was going to sort of hamper growth. If we didn't sort of invest in people and build sort of proper policies, procedures, ways that we do things. We didn't want to be just a private lender that just did things sort of very in a laid back manner. We wanted
you can just do that forever, couldn't you?
Yeah, we wanted to act and behave like a proper business, and we realised that at that point. But it made it easier because we demonstrated a business model, made money, made profits, and we're able to then reinvest those profits back into systems and people.
It's easier when you're making money.
Yeah. So
good. So, and obviously, how many people have we got now? I think you're up to 20.
We're about 22 as we speak. We've got a handful of vacancies. We don't. So no vacancies. We don't sort of treat how big the team is as a barometer of success. I mean, sometimes you hear people say, "Oh, business is amazing. We've got 50 people now or 100 people now." I think we try and we look at our systems and how we can become as efficient as possible. We'll never shy away from bringing people into the business if we feel that our service needs it. That's the key for us. So if we need more bums on seats, we'll always be looking, and we're always looking for talented people. I mean, we've spoken in the past as well about there are certain job roles for us that we may never ever turn off, because if somebody good comes around, we'll take
Yeah.
them. And that's
We've always said that to everyone, it's about finding great people, and great people are never looking when you're looking.
yes,
So sometimes you have to take a bit of a punt, don't you, and go, that's a 3-month time thing, so that's going to cost me a little bit. But it's, I think that people have to remember that, or industry wide, that if you are desperate for that person because you need them right now, but you don't want to, they're never there. Do you know what I mean? It's always, we liken it to food shopping when you're hungry. Just
yeah.
you make bad decisions, but if you're constantly open to looking at great people, then
Absolutely.
then you'll never lose those.
And there's loads of roles, within sales roles, for example, we realise as a business, it's probably skipping back a couple of questions, but in regards to sort of how we operate, we didn't want to spread ourselves thin. We know that there's thousands of brokers throughout the UK, which we'd love to work with. And there's probably a lot of brokers out there that we would love to work with, but we haven't worked with yet, and we haven't spoken to yet. And not because we're lazy or we haven't decided to reach out to them, but we're conscious of, if we start a relationship with someone, we don't want it to feel like scattergun, where we just do a deal or we make a phone call, they don't hear from us again for another 6, 8, 12 months. So we've worked hard on what a relationship looks like for us, and until we feel like we are managing all our current relationships well enough, we're not going to spread ourselves thin, taking on another 100 brokers.
It's about service, isn't it? You offer that service at the beginning. That's the benefit, like you said, the certainty. If you lose that, I mean, you're still going to come across some like tricky hurdles, aren't you, as you grow naturally. Obviously, like, you lose a few people at the beginning. The people that you start with aren't necessarily people you end with, which is what came as a shock to me, because I thought when I first started employing people, like these are but your business changes so rapidly in the first couple of years, doesn't it? That some people don't necessarily fit the business anymore, or it doesn't work that way.
100% like that. And I think, everyone that we've taken on, we don't have any regrets. And I'm not sat here saying, just because we put a lot of time and effort into what a hiring process looks like and what we do with staff, that people don't come and go. And of course that happens. It's not a foolproof method. But
the business, I find the business evolves quicker than people evolve. So if you have got some people who really like the startup bit, and now you're not really a startup, you're 4 years in, so you're a little bit different. You're kind of medium sized. Then you will eventually lose those people because their skill sets don't evolve at the same speed.
I think that's exactly right. And we say we want to maintain, as we grow, that startup feel, that entrepreneurial feel, that buzz. But the truth is, as you grow and there's more members of staff, and we're conscious of people are conscious of their development, the business is a very different business to when there's 2 or 3 people in the office. You come and go as you please, and there's not as much structure. And all of a sudden, as you grow to 20, 30, 40, 50 people, you have to have some sort of structure, because otherwise it's like the Wild West. So there are people that it's hard for them to change as you grow, and it's no reflection on them. But
No. And also the business changes. You have to get more corporate. I know everyone tries to keep that small business feel, but I think I might have said to you the other day, I've got the same thing with the recruitment company. I hear a lot of their recruiters moaning about they're becoming corporate, but I know the CEO, and he's like, I've got 200 people. I literally can't sit down with every person and be like I used to, and help them with every problem and help them with their resourcing, and he'd love to, but you have to at some point put kind of systems in place where the business runs a little bit more corporate, doesn't it?
Absolutely, and I think that's every business's or business owners, CEOs' challenge as the business grows, is if it's important to them to find ways in which to still make people feel valued, still be present, if that's what you want to be. But it's not easy, and I think staff probably have to understand that as well.
I think you can still maintain the culture. It's just the business feels different, right?
Yeah.
You can still have the most important things, like everyone feeling, like you say, needed, or having that consistency of service. But the business does change. You just have to get used to it. And you'll probably feel that on the next kind of echelon, won't you, as you go up to the next stage. And the next stage is just about those kind of hurdles. What's the next one? I think it's like 20 to 50, isn't it? And then once you're over 50, there's another...
100%. Massively, and we'll face those challenges, but we'll embrace it. We've got no concerns, and I think, like you said, it's just important that if that culture's there and you're driving the right behaviours, hopefully people buy into it.
Yeah, absolutely. I do want to touch on about the people side of things, because I know we spoke about this before, but you were very lucky in your career that you got to work very closely with some of the titans of the industry, right? With Henry and Mark and those guys together.
Yeah.
How did that shape your career, and how is that going to help you kind of? And I know that I kind of know this, but you want to kind of pass that on to the next generation, But talk to me about that, about what it did for you and what that means to you.
Yeah, well, it's massive. I was lucky enough that I did get exposure to titans of the industry, like you said, and got to understand sort of how they did things, and I took it upon myself not just to sort of sit there and listen, but to really sort of soak up how they did things. And yes, I was fortunate. There was elements of my sort of 11 years at Together where I didn't have exposure to certain elements of the business, and I had to learn that myself. But I think for me, I realised that to become as much of a sponge as possible, take out of people's brains, whether it's people above you, people next to you. When I say above, people that might be running the business. So throughout my 11 years there, I was dealing with hundreds of different people throughout the business and outside the business, but it massively shaped me because I saw how that business grew. When I joined, it was still a big business, but obviously it grew into a massive business. And watching the evolution and going through that journey was really interesting, and watching how they coped with certain issues and things that came in their way, and typically did more than all right through them. But the individuals themselves, there was a couple of really sort of inspirational people within the business, which understanding how they dealt with situations, the way they assessed transactions, the way they dealt with people within the office. I was able to take a lot of that into.
And you also learn the do's and don'ts as well, don't you? Like you can take certain bits from everyone. You might
Absolutely,
not.
and it's not.
So when
Yeah,
someone does business and then someone else is just take all the best bits.
and we wanted this business to be authentic in the way that we do things. It's very different to maybe how they do things, and a lot of other businesses do things, because we're not a carbon copy of sort of any business that we know. We wanted to kind of have our own footprint, do our own thing, and the way that we maybe communicate to customers or borrowers or brokers, the way that we maybe dress and things like that. We are probably different to other lenders, but we've got our own way of doing things. There are probably people that may look at how we do it and think, I don't like what they do in that regard, and I do like that. So I think that's ultimately
There's something else as well, Michael.
Yeah.
I wrote this down when you said it because you were in a privileged position in the sense that you got to see lots of parts of a business with great people, but you had to take those opportunities, right? Because you're not the only person that's had those opportunities.
No.
But you're one of very few that have gone on to set up their own business from it. So I think that's really important to people. It's easy to be around great people, but it's what you do with the information, right? It's how far you push yourself to soak up that knowledge, because it's pointless being exposed to it and then not utilising it.
100%. I mean, it probably took me a while to probably only once I set up MS did I then realise everything that I'd learned throughout the years. And
I suppose, yeah, because that was just your first kind of job, wasn't it?
Yeah.
So you were like,
Yeah.
it's like being exposed to, say, a Premiership football team when you're young. You have no idea. You just think that's how people play football.
Exactly. So
When you come out and you go somewhere else, you're like, oh shit, they're good.
And I think for me, because it was such a large business and the numbers that we were dealing with were big, it made me realise as well that you can become quite numb to numbers. So when you're talking about tens of millions, hundreds of millions, and that's just everything that you do day to day, that just becomes normal. But then you start your own lender, and when I started lending and we're doing £1 million a month, and you're thinking, God, it's not a lot of money, that. But then in other conversations, people are like, wow, it's a lot of money.
Yeah. So I tend to find out when I speak to my children when we were going into the city, and obviously most of our workers there, and they'll be like, how much do you think that apartment is? I go, I don't know, like 8 million, I think. I'm not that we go anywhere near affording it, but they're like, blows their mind. But we see those transactions every day.
And
so it doesn't,
I think
it
that was
numbs you
probably
to it, doesn't it?
Yeah, I think that was probably a big shift for me, is that I went from an environment of hundreds of millions of pounds that were being lent on a monthly basis to single-digit millions of pounds, and I think for me it was a bit like, oh God, is this a failure? Is this quite small? And I think they were an anomaly to the market to a degree, and it's all relative to the size of business, to what you're trying to achieve.
Yeah, I'm sure their outgoings are a bit more than yours as well.
Yes. But yeah, you realise that you do your own thing, and our barometer of success is.
If everyone gauged their success on how much Together lend, there wouldn't be many lenders. You know what I mean? There's not many of them more.
No, absolutely. I suppose we're like I said, we're still very much in the infancy in our journey and where we want to get to. We're in no rush. We've got no sort of let's say financial goals. I'm not looking to exit the business anytime soon or anything like that. So we just want to keep doing what we do, see how far we can take it, and
And I know obviously this is a bit of a closed question, but you're loving it at the moment because this is the first few years of everything's exciting, right?
Yeah, 100%. We spoke. I've got 2 kids under 4. I've got a business under 4.
Nuts.
It's tough, and it probably won't ever be tougher than this. But I love it, and I think as much as it probably sounds a bit cheesy, it's genuinely true. And you probably ask everyone in the office. What I enjoy most is looking out into the office now and watching sort of the buzz and people sort of talking to each other about deals and new people joining the office and watching them come through their induction. And that, for me, yes, the numbers are great, and then that only happens if the numbers are good. But I think for me, that's the exciting part because I was young when I started. So whilst we're not ageist in terms of our hiring process, I like sort of bringing in young, hungry people that may have no experience.
You've seen the success of it, haven't you, in yourself? So it's easy to know it works, you know?
Yeah, so that's for me. It makes me quite proud to sort of see what we've created.
It is genuine as well. I can see, you know, when you speak to people, you know, you authentically love what you do, and I think that's how we first connected because that is the fun bit, right? It is the fun bit. What growing a business,
100%.
We're all very good online at telling people all the shit bits of like business is tough, the market's hard and stuff, but it gets you out of bed. Even if we're not making loads of money, I probably haven't had a pay rise since I started growing the business a couple of years ago. However, I love coming to work again now. And for 10 years I didn't because I was a one-man band and I was kind of loafing about making enough. But the actual joy of coming to work, I think, comes from growing the business and watching it grow and watching the people grow around you as well. I genuinely believe that.
Yeah, I completely agree. And I think, yes, you hear about loans that people have done and we did this loan and we've had this feedback. And I do genuinely love it. It's not as probably glamorous as people think. I always say that to people because there's things that people
lending
don't
money is cool though, isn't it? If you come from a
100%.
broken background, lending money is cool.
Yeah.
That's what everyone wants to do.
Yeah, there's, people don't often talk about online the difficulties they have with loans and if they've got a loan where they're having to
get the money back.
A point of receivership. Yeah, getting the money out is the easy part. Getting it back's not as easy. So it's not without its challenges, but everyone always says to me I'm a bit like a swan. I'm always very calm. Sort of I do my flapping underwater when but above the water, I'm usually pretty calm.
I think that's really important when you're a business owner as well, is to make those decisions as to what you have to take on board yourself, like the stresses of it and that kind of thing, because that shouldn't be trickling down.
No, and I'm very conscious.
You've got to take that on board. Yeah,
I'm very conscious of that, and as much as I'm a massively open book in the office, I talk openly to the team about lots of things that they probably in other businesses don't, in terms of our funding lines, costs of funding lines, why we're making certain decisions, because I want them to understand sort of why we're doing certain things and the impacts that it could have on the business. But I probably do shelter them a hell of a lot from things that I don't want them to be burdened with. They
don't come to work together. So imagine if you applied the stress that you take onto your employees. Like there's no point in no one sleeping at night. There's a certain amount that you should take as well. I said that I came from commercial finance and I had a boss who was completely opposite direction, where he would apply the stress on you to let you know how hard it was and why they're struggling. And obviously, I mean, he'd also be coming in his Ferrari, so you kind of didn't feel that sorry for him. Yeah. But I just thought if I ever had staff, there's no way I would put it on them.
No,
that was my one thing. He was awful at it, and I
think there's a fine balance. I think for me, pressure. You want people to feel a little bit of pressure. It gets you up in the morning. It gives you a bit of drive, but then you want people to also be able to work with sort of a fairly clear head, because you'll get the best results out of them rather than taking on my stresses or me sort of impressioning my sort of stresses through the office place so people feel nervous or conscious of things. So it is important.
You cry at home, you just got a smile in the office. That's the
exactly that. That's probably what my wife would say happens.
Well, funnily enough, that's kind of on the next part of what I want to talk to you about. Yeah. Because speaking of your wife, your branding is amazing, right? And I think that is one thing that's potentially separated you from some of the guys that we talked about, those very small sort of family investment type businesses. Mm-hmm. And if you speak to anyone, I speak to brokers, speak to people, you've got the branding bang on. And when we spoke, you said something very interesting about looking outside of industry. So just tell me a little bit about how the branding came about, and how important it is for you not to just follow the next guy when it comes to financial services.
Yeah, 100%. I think it was, credit to my wife. She's very heavily involved in the business, and that sort of is her baby, the whole sort of marketing team and the strategy and our content, etc. And she's done it on a much larger scale than MS Lending Group for businesses that she's worked with in the past, but they weren't businesses within the financial services space. And it made me realise that actually, in certain parts of the business, having external industry sort of input and knowledge of how they do things, we didn't want MS Lending to feel bland. Financial services can be seen as quite a bland corporate space, but we didn't want MS Lending Group to feel like that. We appreciate that we are acting within a professional environment. We're not going to do crazy guerrilla campaigns where, it's shock and awe all the time. Yeah, but we also wanted to have a little bit of fun with it. And I think having, Alex came from sort of a fashion background and understanding how some of those businesses do things and ideas, just because we are in financial services, it doesn't mean we have to behave the same way as every other financial services institution or lender does. So, I found it really interesting to try and gain inspiration, because I quite enjoy the marketing side of the business in the way that other companies do things. When we're driving, I look at billboards, I look at online adverts, and not just in financial services, the way that other companies do it. Because I think in this day and age, it's massive. Alex would say to me things like TikTok. So, TikTok, I'm not saying we do lots of business because of TikTok, but I think for the under 30, we are on TikTok, but for the under 30 age group, TikTok is used as a search engine more than Google, for example. And nowadays, the next generation of sort of property entrepreneurs or investors, they might be using TikTok to understand how someone else has done things, watch a little video about a property refurb. So it's easy to be ignorant, to think, we don't need to bother with all that. But we're trying to always think of ways that we can sort of infiltrate and get into the mindset of other people.
On TikTok, do you? My daughter actually found me on TikTok last night. Said, look, there's you. I'm like, I didn't put it on there. Yeah. But it is really useful, like you say. It's the next generation of people where they're going to be looking at you.
Yeah, and we've always tried to be...
Go on, sorry.
No, I was just going to say, we've always tried to be fairly sort of pioneering with products or what we do. So I think we always want to have a look at where the next gap is, or how we can do things maybe a little bit differently, but always with the mindset that it has to add sufficient value. But the marketing side of the business in particular is something that, we do spend a lot of time on. We think about our campaigns, why we're going to do them, what we want the output of them to be. We put a lot of emphasis on the branding, and we think it's pretty good.
So important, isn't it? It's so important how, like your target audience, and also why you're doing it, as opposed to knowing you just have to get out there. It's not just BDMs chucking stuff out. Your brand has to be right.
Yeah, the brand has to be right. It has to be consistent. Things like the phrase brand guidelines, and understanding that we have a certain font, we have certain colours, we have certain size of fonts. Like, all these things were a different world to me, and I would probably in the past have gone, what difference does it make if that letter's in a different font? But for us, it's important. Everything is consistent. Everything is done for a reason, and that's how brands create a strong brand awareness, because of probably that.
And also, like you said, that consistency comes through. You're talking about consistency in your service and that kind of thing. Everything has to reflect the way you do business, right? Whether that be, like you say, whether that be your font or whether that's responding to someone. Everything has to be MS Lending through and through.
And I've been the victim, so I've been in situations since I've started MS Lending where I've been out in sort of in securitization conferences, and the way that some of these banks would speak to me in the jargon, and not understanding it and feeling like you should know something but you don't know it, but you do know it. They're just not asking it in a simple way. And we make sure that, for instance, all our correspondence with customers, we don't sort of put that jargon in there. We don't make it difficult, because it can feel quite intimidating in this space sometimes, and we want to make sure that we're easy to deal with, we're not intimidating, and it's easy to understand.
Amazing.
Yeah.
Good. So, if what advice would you give to someone now? If there will be people out there, especially I speak to lots of relatively successful brokers who kind of feel like that's their next step in lending. I think it is for a lot of them. They've sorted out their lead gen, which is one of the important things. But what kind of advice can you give to people about starting out? What you need to think about? What the kind of the pitfalls or the challenges that you've come up with the first couple of years when you're going out on your own?
Oh, good question. I would say you've got to definitely be authentic. It's such a diluted space. There's so much business out there to be had, but there's so many people that want feeding, and understanding sort of where you sit within the market and being very secure about that. You know, you could be quite a high interest rate lender because you're privately funded, and you do niche things, and there's nothing wrong with that because you're going to serve a purpose, and you've got your sort of your place in the market. I think we're just very keen not to be a jack of all trades lender with lots of products and maybe not be the specialist at any of them. We're we have quite a small product range, but we feel like we are specialists in what we do. So I think my advice would be to sort of know what you want to do and where your sort of initial place is. It doesn't mean it doesn't mean that you can't evolve, but certainly if you're looking to enter the space, you need to have a clear sort of idea of how it is that you're going to make a difference in the marketplace and add value.
That's a really good thing to point out.
To the
making a difference. That's a massive point, isn't it? Making a difference, actually having a product that people go, oh shit, we need that.
Yeah, correct. And it might not be sort of the most glamorous, the cheapest product, but it might be something that actually 1 out of 10 brokers think, oh, you know what, our client could do with that. And slowly but surely it happens. And I think for me, we're not in a rush, and I think it's important. It's important to have financial goals to a degree and have a point where you want to get to, but also not necessarily be in a rush, let it grow organically. In our space, if you're borrowing lots of money, you don't want it burning a hole in your pocket. So you might make rash decisions, like you made the analogy before about, you know, buying food when you're hungry isn't the best idea. So lending money out when you sat there being desperate to get the money out.
Was the first loan quite difficult out of interest? I was talking to someone else who's a smaller lender, and I think it took them something like 6 months because they just kept like, it's not quite right. Or did you
know what? Truthfully, and I'm not reckless at all, I'd actually say no. Maybe that's controversial. I think because I was so comfortable that I'd done it for so long, I'd seen that many loans, I'd seen that many bridging loans, I'd signed off that many bridging loans, I'd underwrote that many bridging loans, that it was almost, not when I say another day in the office, not in a complacency way, because when it is your own money, it's important. But I think the fact that from 18 years of age I had ingrained into me that together their money is my money, that mindset genuinely stuck, and I genuinely did treat it like that. So I think for me, when it is your own money, or you know, money that you're lending out, if you have the same principles, and we say that in the office, of course larger loans there's more risk than a smaller loan, but if you have the same principles and sort of underwriting sort of ethics that go into it, then don't be shock and awed by a slightly larger loan. Just do the same sort of thing. So
same process.
Yeah.
Out of interest, I keep saying last question.
Yeah, that's all right.
Is the coming from an underwriting background, has that made a massive difference? Because I speak, some of the best BDMs I know are underwriters, some of the best business owners I know are underwriters. I think, so I kind of answered the question, but has that made a huge difference because you can look at something in a more process-driven way?
Yeah, I actually had this conversation with our non-exec, a guy called Matt Blake, who's amazing, and we were discussing, and I said to him, I wonder what the percentage of sort of business owners or in the specialist space have either come from maybe an underwriting background, maybe some have come from an accountancy or financial background, and there's probably some that maybe have come from a legal background. And I don't think anyone has maybe had exposure when they start up a business to actually working within, you know, the back end of the business and the finance end of the business, but also the underwriting and the sales end of the business. So I very much was in the underwriting and sales world. So I had to learn a lot. You know, I had to learn the collection side of the business and understand how that worked, and, you know, understand sort of the cash flow side of the business in regards to finance. So I think you'll always have gaps, and it just it reinforces to me that you do never stop learning, because every day I'm trying to bring in people that are a lot better than I am so I can soak up more from them and understand. So yeah, the underwriting background for me was massive, because can't deny it's a key part of the loan if you lend at the right level.
And yes or no, it's the most important thing, right?
Absolutely. So yeah, I think for me that sort of sales and underwriting side, which I did know very well, made life easier, because I knew things like origination of business and assessing business was sort of not the difficult part for us. And then I suppose it's just sharing that knowledge as we grow.
Amazing. Thank you very much, Michael. Appreciate your time. As always, I said I'd be half an hour, and I've gone well over, but
no, apologies.
I do appreciate your time.
No, thanks, Marcus.
If anyone wants to get hold of you, Michael, what's the best way to speak to you? Obviously, all of your socials will be on our socials, etc. But what's the best way if people want to just have a chat with you or ask you a question?
Get in touch with me on LinkedIn, drop me a message. I'm dead open to speaking to anyone about anything. And if people think that I could help them in any way, shape, or form, or would like a chat, then 100% just drop me a message on LinkedIn, and we'll take it from there.
Amazing. And genuinely, you're a genuine, authentic person. I could spot it when we spoke. I love speaking to people like you who love what they do, love the business, and obviously I'm in recruitment, love the people. That's the important thing. Thank you very much for your time, and thanks everyone listening and watching. It's been enough for an episode of NRG Insights, and I appreciate your time, Mike. Speak to you soon.
Take care. Thanks, Marcus.